Good morning, everyone. I hope you got a good night's sleep after yesterday's event. Today, I'm going to share with you a case study we did with T-Mobile's team building internal tools. When we started the work, there were no people from the leadership involved. So this was truly a grassroots level from the UX people working in with the team. And I hope that with this presentation, I can show you that you shouldn't be discouraged if you feel that your leadership hasn't bought in the UX and user-centric practices, because you can drive change from the grassroots level. My name is Anne Joutsenvirta, and I currently work as a principal UX researcher at T-Mobile USA, which is a different company from other T-Mobiles which are in Europe. I moved to US about 9 years ago from Finland, the happiest country in the world. And some of my presentation are linking to the pioneers of the user-centric practices from Europe that I've noticed that a lot of my colleagues in US are not very familiar with. And I hope that I also can kind of show a little kind of different glimpse to organizations. And because in Nordic countries, we have this kind of mindset that all the people in organization are equal, and you shouldn't kind of think that if you are in a bottom of the hierarchy, that you can't drive the change. So in 2019, I was hired to help the team within T-Mobile that makes the tools for the frontline employees, which is like call centers and retail stores. And the team that hired me had a problem. They felt that they were involved in a product development too late. They were not involved with defining what problems to solve, nor they were kind of evaluating how to solve these problems, but they were just kind of told, do this and go on. And because they were involved with users and they were talking with the call center employees and the retail store staff, they realized that those solutions that they were creating did not solve the problems that our users had, or if they solved a problem, they did it in the wrong way. So they kind of wanted to kind of understand how could they get more left, so earlier in a life cycle. And because I was new in an organization, I didn't want to kind of go and tell them, okay, this is what you should be doing. So I recommended that we take a look where we are at now and kind of build from there. So I recommended doing a UX maturity assessment for the practices. So I'm going to tell you today, what is UX maturity? I believe that some of you are very familiar with what it is. To somebody might be new. Also kind of why does it matter? And I give my perception of the history to the different maturity models. Then I'll tell what we did at T-Mobile and what did we do with the information and what did we learn. So, UX maturity is about UX practices and how they are integrated in a way of working in the organization. The assessment measures these practices in an organizational context and how well UX methods and practices are used and how they are adopted by the whole organization, not just the design teams. Mature organizations have adopted user-centric practices in the whole organization. They have built a good understanding of the current and prospect customers. They have like true leadership buy-in that goes beyond the talks in big presentations. And they have created like systematic UX practices, both tactical and strategic. And I had to justify, even if we did this work from the grassroots level, I had to justify why I am doing this work, because obviously leadership expected me to do research that supports the building the tools. So, if UX maturity represents the level of user-centric practices in the organization, the maturity matters for the same reason user-centric practices matter. In peer-reviewed research by, for example, Sari Kujala and the Forrester has published information as well, that organizations that are user-centric or customer-centric have better profit. They make products faster with lower cost. They differentiate from their competition because they are looking what their customers and users need, not what the competitors are doing. And these all lead to higher customer satisfaction. And there is also some research showing that the employees in R&D organizations are happier and more satisfied with the work when the organizations are user-centric. And it's not only the UX people who are happier, but also the engineers and the product managers and other technical staff. Okay, now let's go to the history and foundations of UX maturity, how I see that. I know you might have a different perspective, but I want to kind of remind you that early days, this domain was not called UX. It was called human-computer interaction. And people didn't talk about UX in general, where they talk about usability when they talked about the quality of the products, or they talked about user-centeredness when they talked about the process on how to achieve usable products. And this whole thing, idea of the UX, modeling UX maturity comes from software engineering, where they have been doing like current state analysis when they've been doing the process assessment. And a lot of people still in the 90s, the human-computer interaction folks came from software engineering. And so let's start the journey and go 30 years back in a time when the graphical user interfaces were not the norm. The computers in homes were just coming, and people used mobile phone just to make phone calls. Okay, the beginning of the 90s, there were many different approaches to assess user-centric practices. And some of the early works were linked to the ISO standardization work. And some of the people, quite a few people doing this work were actually working in a working group building the ISO standards, for example, 9241 standard. Simultaneously, many companies were doing internal work and assessing the maturity of the practices. And there is some documentation from companies like Bell and IBM and Philips. And this is an example of the perspective that the people had in those days. And this is a copy of Erlings and Ron's article in book called Cost Justifying Usability from 1994. Year later, IBM folks hosted a special interest group in CHI in 1995 that was called Usability Management Maturity. And this interest group gathered together people from all over the world who were thinking how to improve the practices in the organization to make products more usable. 1996, a fellow called Jonathan Erthing modeled the first maturity model. And this model was based on the work that people did in these ISO standardization committees, IBM maturity works, and then in Europe they had this European Union program called In Use, which coordinated a lot of case studies in companies. The model that Erti was building has 6 steps. And it starts from the level where the organizations don't recognize the need for usability or human-centeredness. The first phase is recognized, and that is where the organizations realize that, hey, we may have a problem with our products. The considered phase is where the actual user focus starts. Then it goes to implement it, where the user involvement grows in a product lifecycle, and the focus is on, do we have the right type of skills within our organization? The integrated phase brings more like iteration aspects to and improves the practices. And then the highest level is institutionalized, and that is the highest level. And in that one, companies are really invested in user-centric practices. This is a model that, for example, Nigel Bevan was using when he was advocating usability maturity in different events in those times. Timo Jokela and his associates from Oulu University and Helsinki University of Technology used this model when they were doing case studies with companies called Teamware and Nokia mobile phones. During this assessment, I was working with the sister organization of this both, so first Teamware and then Nokia. And I remember that we had a lot of fuss among the usability people about this assessment. And the outcome from the assessment kind of created a matrix of strengths, improvements, benefits, and costs. And the idea was that it would be more like a self-reflection tool for the usability people and people who make decisions. After the assessment, Teamware assessment, the authors of this paper wrote that it's evident that assessing the capability and processes is not enough. At least if you're thinking about the organizations that are less mature, or where the usability has been recently introduced and doesn't have much of the impact yet. And there are other dimensions that you need to consider. And it's not only about the process, it's also about the awareness, it's about the attitudes and skills and empowerment and resources that the organizations have on user-centric practices. And for example, an organization may have great processes, but the usability doesn't have an impact because of lack of awareness of the people who make the decisions. So they kind of introduced 3 dimensions of human-centeredness: organizational awareness, human-centered infrastructure, and the processes. Another early model is a Danish design maturity ladder. And this is created by Danish Design Center. And they created this ladder to assess how the different Danish organizations are utilizing a design rather as a process than an outcome. And they wanted to create tools and awareness for decision makers to evaluate where they are and what is the rate of return of design investment. They use this ladder to measure the role of design in organization and decision making. And they say that when organizations go higher in a ladder, that they are more user-centric or customer-centric, and that makes their customers happier, and the organizations can differentiate from their competitors. They use this model to assess the companies with phone interviews. And they did the assessment in 2003 and 2007 using this model. And they noticed that within these years, the companies on the lowest ladder dropped from 36% to 15%. and then the companies in a higher level raised from 15 to 21. And there was another study done by the Danish companies that showed that those companies that invested in design showed additional growth in gross revenue by 250%. And compared to the companies who did not. And the reason why I'm kind of showing this is, well, this is one of the models that we evaluated when we made the decision to which one to go for. But it's also kind of very topical because this is a cornerstone for a European Union's agenda to create smart and sustainable and inclusive solutions. And European Commission has stated that companies that invest in design tend to be more innovative, more profitable, and grow faster than the companies who don't. So you may kind of recognize something like this. This is Jakob Nielsen's first usability maturity model. And this is from 2006. And this one has 8 stages. I haven't seen data, and I don't know if Jakob is familiar with or was familiar with the Danish model when he built this, but because he's from Denmark, I'm pretty sure he does. Maybe it's been his inspiration. And this was a model that Nielsen Norman Group was presenting in their website in 2019 when we started the work. This model has 8 stages, and each one describing the attitudes and organizational circumstances of companies about user-centric practices. It starts from the companies that show total hostility. And I think Jakob has said in some interviews that the slogan for these companies could be a good user is a dead user. And usability people don't really have any chance of advocating user-centric practices in organizations like that. You could be talk to a wall and have an equal amount of impact. And the first level where you can start talking about user-centeredness is the second phase. And that's where the leaders may say that they appreciate usability or UX, but that doesn't really show in the actions. And then when stages go higher, attitudes towards usability and users improves. And first, the user-centric practices are adopted by individual teams, and then later by people building organization strategy. At the highest level, the whole organization is driven by user-centric practices. And raising these stages mean that the organizations are focusing on research, robust design procedures, and the right tools. This model was not available when we started the work, but I wanted to show you that recently Nielsen Norman Group has upgraded the model and made it 6 steps like the Earth's first model was. And they have also published some data to show how big percentage of the companies are in different levels. And they have improved the stage descriptions and what is a strategy to get from one level to another one. And they have implemented a survey with 13 questions to assess where the organizations are in a maturity. And in addition, they have shifted focus to more on the whole organization instead of the individual teams. And they see that there are 4 things that you need to focus on when you are raising the maturity. And that is a strategy, a culture, process, and the outcomes. Based on the data that they have on their website, 49% of the companies are in an emergent phase. 27% are in a structured phase, which is number 4. and less than a fraction of the percent of organizations are in a highest level where they are, like organizations are user-driven. Measuring UX maturity model is, like the other ones, a model that assesses organizations' UX capabilities and processes and helps them to understand the current state and identify areas of improvement. The model assesses components such as like budget, methods, processes, and the organization attitudes towards UX. And like this model from the 90s, the model has 6 steps. First is called unrecognized, where the UX practices are non-existent. And maturity grows through stages where issues are recognized and practices become first more systematic, and when you get the higher maturity level, more strategic. Sauro, Meenan, and Johnson have built a survey that they used to empirically validate the model of UX maturity assessing with 150 organizations. And they also published a paper in CHI in 2017. Based on their data, half of the organizations in 2017 were in considered phase, like number 3. And 17% were in managed, stage number 4, and 4% in a highest level, like both like the data from the Nielsen-Norman group and the Measuring U data show that most companies are in this kind of middle, either considered, managed. This is the kind of block where we are, which means that if you think about UX people in general, most people have never worked in an organization that is higher than managed, where the practices are tactical, maybe very good tactical practices, but kind of not necessarily strategic. At T-Mobile, we decided to do the assessment ourselves because we didn't have the executive sponsor with money to hire an agency to do the work for us. And if you have a possibility to hire a vendor, like that's a totally kind of alternative. And there are pros and cons for doing it yourself and hiring an external company. And the models, the 4 models that I showed, were among the gazillion models that we were assessing. They are like, if you type in your search engine UX maturity model, you will get a huge list of different models. And we kind of discussed what is the reason and requirements that we have when we are choosing the model. And I wanted to use an existing model rather than building our own, because building a model that kind of models is not our job. And it takes a lot of time to validate these models. And I kind of found a meta-analysis from Carvajal and Moreno that was assessing maturity of maturity models. And that meta-analysis showed that there are huge differences between the different models. And we wanted to select the one that is mature. And there was one model that had like more tools that let us kind of do more of like a quantitative approach of the thing. So the model that we chose was in line with the Measuring U and practically in a human-centeredness scale from the 1996 as well. And it has long history. It was mature. It has very good descriptions of the levels and strategy. They had already created a survey that they have validated. They had peer-reviewed articles available, which I appreciate because I could then link to those kind of to my stakeholders if somebody asked what we are doing, and they already had baseline data. I kind of see that like the measuring you model is like a child or grandchild of the human-centeredness scale. And it even has steps that 1, 3, 5, and 6 are named the same way. And it also kind of like philosophically, it has similar definitions that are linked to the ISO standardization. And this is something that Jonathan Erthy himself, he valued a lot, that they are built on standardization because of the iterative process and review process that the standards go through. And this is how we visualized the model at T-Mobile. We used this model with 6 steps, and the first 3 steps are considered to be less mature, and then 3 latter ones are considered to be more mature. And the first one is unrecognized, and this is where, like in all other models with 6 steps, this is where the users are not valued. If there is any designers involved, they are mostly doing just visual design, and developers are designing UI. And users are considered rather blockers than things to consider. And then the next step is where the organizations realize that they have problems, and they collect the information mostly ad hoc, or they may have anecdotes about how the users and customers are behaving. And design, they may even do some usability tests, but they usually do the usability test late when the product is already out or about to be launched, in the phase where nothing can be done. Actually, when I started my work as a usability engineer, I think that this is where the organization that I was working at was, and I had feeling that the teams were mostly printing my reports to garbage bin, like no impact of any kind. The considered phase is where the actual user focus starts. UI is designed by designers mostly, and they make some changes according to the user test outcome, but at this phase, user research is mostly usability testing. Implemented is the lowest from the mature steps. And this is where the organizations have good tactical practices. They may have a good intake process. They may be able even to kind of use appropriate methods. They might be UX leaders in a house who look that the resources are used the appropriate way. And research is more than usability testing. It could be interviews, focus groups, and so on. And this is where people kind of feel comfortable. But there is a kind of way up. And the kind of next one is integrated. And this is where the UX work is integrated in the organizational practices, and they have a systematic early feedback loop. They don't launch products if they fail, like UX success metrics, which means that they actually have defined some UX metrics to start with. And they kind of may be thinking that, what is the next customer problem that we could solve? And use the research for that. And institutionalized is the highest step. Personally, I've never worked in an organization at this level, but I used to work as a UX consultant in Finland, and I did some consulting work for companies that way at this level. So I know that they do exist. Not very many, but they do. And in these companies, how they operate is that they start everything from users and customers. They are data-driven, insight-driven in their actions. And the leadership is really, really committed to user-centric practices. And that means that not only UX, the product teams and product organizations are user-centric, the whole organization is. So at T-Mobile, we use 3 methods to do the assessment. We used a survey, we did document reviews, and interviews. And the survey that we used was the one that Measuring You, Saura, Milan, and Johnson were created with small additions. We divided the research and design practices as separate questions, and then we added different methods and artifacts that are created as in a list. Our respondents, they identified themselves mostly as UX researchers, UX designers, UX generalists, but we also sent the survey to our product managers and business owners and used that information to see that if UX people say that they did something, how aware the business people and product managers were of these actions. With survey, we assessed the education background and the knowledge background of the UX staff and awareness of UX practices of these non-UX roles, how the organization is working, what methods are used, how the information of users is used in the decision making, at which phase of the life cycle, how the UX is integrated in the practices, how people value UX, and what challenges that people saw for the future. The document review, we kind of checked from our organization documentation what kind of UX roles we have, what is a ratio between the UX designers and UX researchers, designers and developers, what kind of training and skills people have, and what is available, what kind of what is the team's strategy? Do they mention users or customers in their strategy documentation? Have they defined success metrics for the products? And do these success metrics have any UX metrics, behavior or subjective, pre or post-launch? And do they have UX budget and resources available, especially kind of looking at, is there such budget that would allow teams to do experimentation and not just strictly focused on specific product to deliver something. And then to link the UX maturity with the quality of the outcome of the teams, we decided to use system usability scale. It's not perfect, and it does measure the perceived usability and nothing more. It doesn't measure all aspects of product quality. It doesn't measure all aspects of experience. But the good thing is that it's relatively easy to implement, and we know what it measures. And we also know that that there is data showing that the SaaS is correlating with the traditional behavioral usability metrics, like task completion rate, time in task, errors in task. And my peers at AT&T have shown that these correlates with sales and business metrics. And I think Sauro has also showed that SaaS in productivity tools, that were our focus area. We build productivity tools for our employees. That correlates with all these and Net Promoter Score. So we kind of thought that it's a good starting point. We did measure also like traditional usability metrics, the behavioral metrics, but it's more like complex mess. And yes, I think a lot of people think, what about kind of linking these to business metrics? We considered that, and we are actually currently like linking these to the business metrics, but because we were working from the grassroots level, and we know that every given moment, There are so many changes happening both in our call centers and our retail stores that we don't have control over. There are different promotions that impact on how things are going. There might be like a promotion in December that increases the calls to call centers in January, and things can be very kind of complex. So we decided, okay, we go with this one. So in 2020, 2021, and 2022, we conducted 3 rounds of UX maturity assessment for 4 different teams. And like I said, these tools are the tools that our call centers and retail stores are using to do their job and service the customers. And I will show the outcome of each year in a matrix that shows the maturity of the team and the SAS score of the product that they are building. And then after that, I'll show some recommendations that I created for the team and activities we did after each assessment. So first year we had 3 teams, and this assessment happened about the time when the pandemic lockdown was happening. And then I asked people to look back 1 year and think about what methods were used and how they were operating, and how what were the practices in practical 2019. The 2 teams presented with the circle and the triangle were teams that were building systems that used legacy code. And then the one on the top, the square, that was a team that built a new tool without a legacy package. And you see that the team that was in a recognized phase, less mature, had a SAS score of a little bit over 50, like 55. Then the one with the triangle was in a considered phase, and it had a SAS score of like a little bit over 60. And the one that was more mature, only one in a mature scale, was having a SAS score of like a little bit over 80. So after assessment, I created a current state analysis for each team and recommendations, what they should be doing to get to the next level. And all these teams, they had different practices, different strengths, different weaknesses, but the 2 teams that were working on legacy systems had some similarities as well. So this is a example of the recommendations that I did for them, and I recommended that they increase the number of methods they are using to be able to assess different product life cycle. And for example, in both teams were overusing focus groups. Every time there was some research needed, stakeholders were saying, okay, let's do a focus group. And it was totally used in the wrong way, wrong place all the time. Then I kind of recommended that we are improving the early prototyping and testing and have faster testing iterations, and using the right as well. And I recommended that the teams will also kind of create and define some UX metrics and educate stakeholders. And the team that was the square one, that was on the top, they were already doing a lot of these things. They actually had defined and discussed within the team that what does the success look like? How do we measure that? And they had already defined some UX metrics to measure that. One kind of example of things that we implemented was Magic Wand. And we tried to kind of, with this Magic Wand, thought that we are impacting the roadmap, and we are giving the leadership understanding of what are the biggest pain points our customers have, our users have. I've used Magic Wand in like almost 30 different countries, and it works pretty well in North America in a business context. In some countries, it does not. And I've heard people saying that, okay, Magic Wand is totally a waste of time because people don't have good ideas. But it should not be used to come up with ideas of solutions, because people don't come up with good solutions. But it's a great tool to let people talk about the biggest pain points they have. And we have been using Magic Wand, and we report quarterly to our 3 different VPs and their leadership teams to make them aware of what are key pain points. And we have actually seen that the things that we have now in our roadmap come from the like early Magic Wand reports. Another thing is that we chose system usability scale as a backbone for our quarterly survey that we sent to frontline employees to assess the quality of the experience and usability of the products that are tools that they are using. And we started with the team that was with the triangle, because they were more receptive of improvements. We had some issues with the lowest ranking team. They were refusing to accept that their practices were not good, or that their product wasn't at a good level of usability. They kind of saw over a time, they've seen that what we have achieved with this other team, and they are now fully aboard. So next year, 2021, I didn't really plan on doing assessment 1 year after the first assessment, because I didn't think that 1 year is enough to make changes. And I think Jakob Nielsen has said that when organizations are in a lower level of maturity, it takes about 2 years to get to the next level. And when they are higher in a maturity, it can take up to 8 years to get to the next level. But 2 teams that were like more mature with their practices wanted to know if the changes that they have done for the practice has had an impact. So we did see some improvement, especially for the triangle team. They clearly improved in the maturity. They had adopted more practices that are more typical in implemented phase, and they had improved the SAS score of the legacy product to little over 70. The other team didn't really make, they did some changes in their practices, but it didn't really have a big impact on the SAS score because it was already pretty high. So the recommendations that we had after this assessment were mostly like a fine-tuning. For example, I recommended that team shift focus on more strategic practices. We fine-tuned the UX metrics. And for example, we recognize that the stakeholders has difficulties with the traditional SAS, not the score itself, but individual question averages, because they didn't understand why 5 is sometimes good and sometimes bad. So we switched to positive scale SAS, so that they would understand better and they would read it better. And then we started building the way to get UX involved in the pilot phase of the product lifecycle. The third assessment we did in December 2022, January 23. And in this assessment, the teams were evaluating what were the practices in calendar year 2022. 2 of the teams were original legacy tool teams, but the one that in the square, we kind of switched that to another team that was building for same target audience than the circle kind of one, the lowest maturity. And the reason was that this was a team that was, the T-Mobile, we tried to experiment with the scaled agile model, and which has UX practices built in, but very tactical level. So we wanted to make a case study and try out what happens if you are building more strategic UX practices in the scaled agile? Would that be possible? And for example, that team decided that the scaled agile team decision-making body is a triad with a product manager and architect and release train engineer, which is like a scrum master. But this team decided to have a business owner and UX lead as permanent members of this decision-making body. And it actually paid off pretty well. It is the first product that T-Mobile has ever made that has SAS score over 90. And when I talked with the team that was building this, this kind of safe experimental team, and they said that they did everything they could to integrate user-centric practices in their way of working. And working differently would have required them to have impact on like things that the executives have, like how do you budget things? How do you operate the whole organization, and how does the whole organization or company prioritize things? And based on their experience and also the other one with the Square team, it seems that it's really, really difficult, almost impossible to get higher than this implemented integrated level without the executive support. And in those cases, if you get to the higher level, you really need to have the user-centric mindset in an organization and leadership. And yes, a lot of companies say that they are like customer obsessed, but that obsession is like how the paparazzis are obsessed with the celebrities. They don't think what is good for the celebrity. They think, how do I make money from this celebrity? And there is a big difference on that. And if you think that both Measuring You and Nielsen Norman Group, they data shows that there's like handful of companies at this level, in the highest level. And I think Berkeley research has shown that about 9% of the companies are truly customer-centric. So there's a lot to be done, and I think what we need to do is to kind of make sure that not only UX people are aware of these practices and importance of them, but we also get the leadership and engineering teams involved. Like a side thing, like an observation from our kind of study was that we noticed that when we are asking people to self-evaluate where they think that teams UX maturity is, that there was a little bit kind of difference of the perception versus the data. And this is the team one that was presented with the the circle. And when they were in a considered phase based on their practices, but they actually thought that they were implemented. And in 2020, when they were in recognized phase, they actually thought that they were in integrated. So lower they are in maturity, higher they think they are. And then team two, it was the triangle team, they were in implemented, and at that point they kind of note that, okay, we are in implemented. When they were in a considered phase, they actually thought that they are more of the integrated than they are. So my hypothesis is that when organizations become more mature, they also become more self-aware. And which is kind of interesting. It's also kind of thing that how well does the self-assessment work when the organizations are in a lower maturity level? They may work when they are mature. But this little case study with 4 teams and 8 assessment, they kind of indicate that there is a correlation. And the improvements that we have made over time between the assessments kind of indicate that there might be also like a causality between the maturity and the product usability. But with 8 data points, we can't say that this is the ultimate truth. So I think we need more data. And where I am, we cannot do this kind of that scale research where we are getting 100 data points. So I kind of look for the people who are in kind of UX agencies who have customers all over the country and the world, because they can do that. They can suggest the maturity assessment and assess the level of experience of the product and usability. And but it's not enough that we have the data. What we as a UX community need to do is that we need to make sure that also the people in the business and engineering know this information, and we need to go to present our kind of data and outcome to the conferences where the business people go and where the engineering people go, and also to universities and faculties where the future leaders are studying. Because that's the kind of way how we make an impact and not just kind of discuss among ourselves. I think we have time for a couple of questions, but before that, I want to thank my colleagues Brett, Cara, Douglas, Jess, Joe, Monica, Thomas, and Veslava, because without their support and without their contribution, we would not have been able to do the change in our organization. Yeah, give me a second.
Thank you for your talk. Did you notice any difference in the different roles and how they assessed their own maturity? Was there a difference in how leaders assessed the maturity of the team versus the individual contributors?
There was a difference between the UX people and non-UX roles, regardless of what the level of, if they were individual contributors or leaders, or people with authority. And yes, UX people were much more harsh. They actually often thought that their team practices were much lower than they actually were.
And then I had another question. You mentioned that you did some consulting for ones that would be considered an institutionalized maturity level. And why do companies that are at that level seek out a UX consultant?
Because they wanted to have a different perspective that is in their own organization. So they did have their own UX people. They had people in leadership level were pretty aware of that, of the UX practices, but they sometimes wanted to have a kind of outsider perspective.
That was really interesting. I really appreciate the talk. I'm curious, when it comes to UX maturity of an organization, how much of that is, I guess, how responsible is the UX team of that overall maturity?
I think UX team can impact till at least considered phase and the early maturity phases, kind of building a tactical practices.
Got it.
Intake processes and feedback loops and things like that. But then when it goes to more strategic, yes, we as UX people, we can impact, we can talk and find information to justify more actions in the leadership. But then it really depends on whether your leadership is open for dialogue, and it can take a long time. Like for this one team that wasn't very open, that like was in denial after the first assessment, it took almost 2 years to like open the conversation with them and their leadership.
Got it. Thank you.
Hi,
Hi.
thank you very much. I really enjoyed this talk. I kind of have two questions. One to validate how you use the SUS scale, and so that question is, I'm not familiar with the SUS scale being used internally, and is that because the UX team or the product teams can also use the product? Would it be applicable to use if your product is used by a specialized user? So that's my question.
Yeah, well, our users were specialized users, like the people in our call centers. They have set of tools that they are using, and they are trained to do their job, and that's also in our kind of retail stores. I think SUS is working better than some other like surveys for those, because it has this like, it's based on the ISO standard definition of usability, efficiency, effectiveness, and user satisfaction in a specific context. So, yeah.
I guess for more of an example, in my company, we develop applications for clinical users, but our team, a majority of the team, 90% of them are not clinical users. So would it be applicable to use the SUS scale internally for them to assess their maturity? Or is it better to maybe ask more, not the SUS scale specifically, but maybe just basic maturity questions?
Yeah, I think, well, like if your team is not the target audience of the products, you can't assess the level of usability. You can assess the level of maturity of the practices, and then have use the SUS or whatever UX metric model or kind of system you have or want to use, that makes sense for the target audience when assessing the quality of the products with those target audiences.
Thank you very much.
I really appreciated your talk as well. But what you mentioned that there was a group that was more resistant to that change. Were there certain tools that you used to help them understand where they were at, and like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, convince them to move forward?
The kind of two things that we did was that I started showing the link between the maturity level and the kind of the level of usability of the products to our VPs. I started like pushing that to them, and then we reported every win that we got from the team that we worked with, the triangle team. We made sure that the other team knows, and we started getting like advocates from the product managers of that team. We started getting advocates in our machine learning team, who always kind of said that in meetings that how they loved working with our UX researchers and designers, and how we added value to their work. So we used other people to to advocate. Okay. Thank you. I think it's a coffee or tea time.